Hey guys, it's Alexis, aka The Sloth Reader, and I'm here today to do my October wrap-up. Sorry this is coming to you guys pretty late. I had a really busy start to the month of November. I had 2 tests and a 10-page paper due, and then with the election and everything, and then I had to take mine and my cats to the vet, and it's just been a busy couple of weeks. So I haven't gotten a chance to do this yet, but that's why we're here today, so I can go ahead and knock it out. My cat was after my coffee, so I had to go grab it. I completed a total of 9 books in the month of October, and I read 100 pages in one before I DNF'd it, so I will just go ahead and get into it. The first thing I read in the month of October was We Should All Be Feminist by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And I'm sure this one's pretty hot on BookTube, and basically it's the essay version of a TED Talk that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie did, and basically it's all about like feminism and some of the misconceptions about feminism, and and she kind of talks about like throughout her life how she's had instances where people have treated her differently for being a woman, and overall I gave it 4 stars. For me personally, after I read the essay itself, I went and watched her TED Talk, and I found the TED Talk much more impactful personally. Just getting to actually watch her display the speech, and she's so elegant and classy, and just the whole situation with it. The speech itself is an absolute 5 stars, but the book itself, I feel like because she just wrote it down as an essay, a lot of things could have been expanded upon, because she really didn't have like a time constraint with with an essay, so I kind of wish the essay had been fulfilled a little bit more, fluffed out, but it's still absolutely impactful. I just happen to recommend the speech more than I recommend the actual essay itself. The next book I completed in the month of October is a book that I have been personally working on since the beginning of the year. I'm talking like the end of January, February region. I've been listening to it on audiobook, and I said I wanted to complete it this year, and I did. It just took me forever, and that was The Arabian Nights. Of course, I wasn't reading this edition, though I do own this edition because it's absolutely gorgeous. I know on BookTube a lot of people have tried to read it and whatnot, and here's my advice. I listened to it on audiobook, and I think that's the right way to go. A lot of these stories were told traditionally via oral recounting, much like, Homer stories were with the Iliad and the Odyssey. Much like Shakespeare is much better on stage than it is in print, personally, for me. And so I think that listening to somebody read these was much better than if I tried to read these myself. That being said, I gave this one a 3 stars. There were some stories that I really, really loved. Of course, ones that I had familiarity with, Sinbad and Aladdin. And then there were some that I had no idea about, but I really enjoyed them. And then there were some that I honestly can't even remember what they were about because they just kind of were okay to me. So I just decided that a 3 stars was the best overall rating because some of them I really loved, some of them were 5 stars for me, some of them were 1 or 2 stars, so I just went ahead and gave it a pretty standard 3 stars. But if you are looking for something really fantastical, I do think it's worth the listen to. And I mean, I still enjoyed a lot of the stories, so I finally finished it. It took me so long, but I finally did it. The next book I completed in the month of October was The Light Between Oceans by M.L. Stedman. I have a very love-hate relationship with this book. I pretty much loved the first 2/3 of the book, and then I hated the final third of the book. So for that reason, I did give it 3 stars. I really like the way Emil Stedman writes. A lot of these sentences were very profound, and I kept thinking about them after the book was over. I was just like, wow, she made that statement about war and veterans, and it just really stayed with me, and whatnot, whatnot. I also really, really loved all of the parts about the lighthouse. I really, really love that. I found that very fascinating. I found myself constantly wanting to know more about, like, the lighthouse industry. So part of the enjoyment I got was really from that. And in the very beginning of the novel, I really liked both Tom and Isabel. I liked their relationship. I liked the way they were together. I liked their characters individually. And then towards the middle of the novel, they both kind of become somebody that you don't like. And it's kind of like through that like the big incident of the novel takes place. And so I ended up, like I said, I really, really loved the first. I mean, based on the first 2/3 alone, I thought I was going to give it 5 stars. And then the final third of the book was just, I'm just so unhappy with like everything that happened in the final third of the book. And it was enough to just absolutely ruin my enjoyment for the entire book. But I am still very excited to see the movie. I haven't seen it yet, but I absolutely love Alicia Vikander and Michael Fassbender. And so I am really interested to see how they play the characters. And so, yeah, now I can go see the movie and there's no issues there. So, again, I gave it 3 stars. Next book I completed in the month of October completely took me by surprise. I was not expecting to love it nearly as much as I did, and that is Legend by Marie Lu. I have had people tell me to read the Legend trilogy for years, and I just, for whatever reasons, I was never really interested in it. I didn't really ever think I would like it. There really was nothing about it that really struck me as, like, unique or whatever when you just read the synopsis. But I picked it up because it was on my Goodreads recommendations page, and the Around the Year in 52 Books has a challenge to read a book from your Goodreads recommendation page, so I was like, okay, have it on my Kindle, whatever, I'll just read it, it should be pretty quick. And I literally was in love from, like, page 1. I absolutely loved it. I love both June and Day, and I love that the book alternated from both of their perspectives. That made it so much more enjoyable than if it had just been from either June or Day's. Like, I don't think I would have loved the book nearly as much if it had just been from one or the other's perspective. So, very, very successful use of dual perspectives. I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars. Pretty much the only 2 issues I really had with the book is that I very much feel like the relationship between June and Day was very insta-lovey. There really was no development. They knew each other for like 4 days, and then they were like, I'm in love with you and ready to take down a government for you. And I was just like, okay, well, no, that's not how that works. And I just feel like the book would have benefited so much more from June and Day being older than they were. I had to really suspend my disbelief for June and Day being 15 years old. And, like, I get it that they're supposed to be these prodigies, and that's why, like, it's effective that they're 15, but I literally was reading this book, and in my mind, I kept imagining them as being 17 or 18 years old, because I was like, no, I'm sorry, but no. Being 15, first of all, you don't know Jack. You don't know Jack at 15. This is me. I'm 21. I still don't know Jack, but I'm telling you, you don't know Jack at 15. You don't have the insight to know Jack at 15. And they were just way too mature for that age, and so I really think the novel would have benefited from them being older, because you can still be a prodigy at 18. I mean, like, you don't have to be a fetus to be a prodigy. Anyway, I still highly, highly enjoyed it. I immediately bought the graphic novel and read the entire book again in graphic novel form, so I'm pretty excited to go ahead and read Prodigy, and hopefully I'll like it as much. The next book I finished in the month of October was one I've been reading for quite a while as well, and it was this big old beast, Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. This is a pretty controversial series, a pretty controversial book itself. A lot of people had a lot of issues with this. I do not think it was issue-free. I had several issues with this book. I ended up ultimately giving it a 4.5 stars because I still am in love with this world. I'm still absolutely completely invested to see, you know, how this ends and where we're gonna go from here and whatnot. But I did take off a full star because I had 2 really big issues with the book. The first is that I find that I don't love Aylin nearly as much as I love Selena. I mean, I got a tattoo for Selena because I loved her and I connected with her so much, and this, you know, broken empathy that she had, and I just find that I don't connect with Aylin as much as I connected with Selena, and I find that that's a drawback, and that's kind of a shame for, in later books, you to really disconnect from the main character. And so I just don't, and I don't like that this book, I feel like, lacked a lot of the emotional depth that I personally found Heir of Fire had, and part of that is just that she's made this switch to Aelin, and so that was one of the issues I had, was just that, I didn't really love the main character as much as I had in previous books, and I mean, I really couldn't, getting through a lot of her chapters were hard, but my absolutely undying love for Manon kind of makes up for that. And the other issue I really had with this book is that I don't really love, with the exception of one, and it's going to shock you, I don't really like pretty much any of the relationships in this book. I don't like Aelin and Rowan. I don't like it when a main character, when your author spends an entire book going, these two are not a couple, and then the next book it's like they're trying to tear each other's clothes off. I don't enjoy that. I think that that's cheap. So that was pretty upsetting. I'm to be honest, the relationship between Aelin and Adian kind of makes me uncomfortable. Because some of the stuff he says to her, is similar to the stuff Rowan says to her. And that makes me very uncomfortable, because I'm like, one of these is like her future lover, one of these is her cousin. So, like, pretty much any scene, I love Adian, but pretty much any time he was talking to Aelin, my face was just like this. I'm not sure how I feel about Manon and Dorian yet. Just because, I'm gonna be honest, I was, like, supremely holding out my hope that Manon was going to be, just, I don't know, Manon feels so above, like, relationships, and so I kind of was just like, I don't want Manon to be with anybody, and so, like, I don't know how I feel about her and Dorian, so I'm really iffy on that. The only relationship I honestly can say that made sense to me in this book was the relationship between Aelin and Chaol. And that's going to shock a lot of you, because you're going to be like, wait, but that's what most people hate about this book. But it honestly made sense to me, because Aelin was a completely different person, and in a lot of ways Chaol was too. I mean, in Heir of Fire, a huge part of Chaol's chapters are him dealing with the fact that that Celaena is a fae, and she stands for everything that he's kind of always been against. And all the things that he's been taught, and that she is ultimately a foe of the kingdom that he was raised in. And so, like, their initial hostility to one another made complete sense to me. Like, I was like, okay, yeah, and especially when she's like, hey, I'm gonna kill Dorian, and Dorian was literally the only thing Chaol had left. Like, that made so much sense to me. And then the fact that they ultimately reconciled with one another, and, went back to the friends that they used to be, like, that, their relationship was the only relationship in this book that actually made sense to me. That I was like, yeah, this is pretty accurate for how people would honestly behave, like, and I hear a lot of people saying that they thought that Chaol's character was, like, ruined in this book, and I literally went into this book a lot more critical for that reason, and I don't find that at all. Like, Chaol was still the same Chaol as he was in Throne of Glass to me. He was completely dedicated to his cause and to Dorian, and I'm rambling on about this book too much because I came out of it with a lot of feelings, no surprise, that's pretty massive, but I might end up having to film just a whole thing on this one because I had a lot to say about it, but anyway, I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read in the month of October was one because it was getting close for Halloween and I was like, ooh, let's get some spooky books. And so I read This Is Not a Test by Courtney Summers. I love books about zombies, so this one was one I was so totally invested in picking up. Ultimately, I gave this one 4 stars. I really, really loved it. This is about a group of teens who are trapped in a school that's like overrun with zombies, and they're kind of just dealing with one another, and about, like, there's some events that have happened before the book takes place, and it's caused a lot of tension in the group, and I really liked this. I liked that the cast was very small, and that provided, like, opportunity for you to really get to know the characters, and I loved Sloane, the main character. I loved that, you know, she was struggling with, you know, her life and her family, and how that was like this internal conflict versus this external conflict. And I really did. I mean, like, I absolutely loved this book. I loved the characters. They were all very heavily flawed, and how they kind of had to work together. Ultimately, I kind of wish the ending hadn't been quite as rushed as it was, and that there may have been just a couple more chapters to kind of give, like, real closure. But in a book about a zombie apocalypse, I also do understand the importance of maybe an open-ended ending. Overall, though, I really enjoyed this, and I found it very, very enjoyable, so I give this a 4 out of 5 stars. The next couple of books I'm going to mention, I have actually already done a wrap-up because I read them for the Spookathon at the end of October, so I'm not going to go too much in them. I'm just going to briefly mention what I gave them, but I will link my Spookathon wrap-up down below in case you do want to kind of hear more of my thoughts about it. But overall, I really enjoyed pretty much every book I read for the Spookathon, with the exception of the one I DNF'd. However, the other 3 were pretty fantastic, and I highly recommend all of them. First book I read for the Spookathon was Anna Dressed in Blood by Kendar Blake. I recently read Three Dark Crowns by Kendar Blake, and I'm pretty much obsessed with it. So I was like, oh, well, let's just pick up every other thing written by Kendar Blake. And I gotta say, I absolutely love this one too. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. And like I said, I'm not going to go into it, but I did really enjoy it. It's very much supernaturally. A lot of people have compared it to that, and I would definitely agree. Very Buffy the Vampire Slayer too, so if you're into those kinds of things, I would definitely recommend Anna Dressed in Blood. Next book I picked up for the Spookathon was Blood and Salt by Kim Liggett. This was the one I ended up DNFing. I gave it about 100 pages, just wasn't my thing. It was just very tropey from the get-go, and it didn't capture my attention, and I was like, I have a week to read books, not wasting my time, so I ended up DNFing that one. Next book I picked up was the anthology Slasher Girls and Monster Boys, which is collected by April Genevieve Tucolque, and I ended up giving this one collectively a 4 stars on my Goodreads. I will leave the actual link to my Goodreads review where I individually kind of rated each one. 4 was kind of the collective rating for each of them. There were some I really loved, some I really hated, so pretty much, but it definitely was still interesting because they were all based off of traditional horror stories, either books and or movies, so that was really cool, especially the ones that kind of took on their own lives, even as short stories. Some of them I would have read whole books about. They were that interesting to me. So yeah, I gave that one 4 stars. The last book I read in the month of October, and to be honest, one of my favorite books of the entire year, was Shallow Graves by Callie Wallace. This, again, I'm not going to go too into it because I rambled about it in my Spookathon wrap-up, but I was so absolutely surprised by how much I loved this book. I ended up giving it a 5 stars, and that's because there really wasn't a climax. There was, but it didn't really resolve the way I wanted it to, and that's the only reason I took off a star at all. But everything else about this book was so standout to me. We have a half Chinese main character who is bisexual. There are 2 Arab characters, a pair of brothers. One of them is implied to be somewhere along the LGBTQIA+ spectrum. It deals a lot with rape culture and just the whole boys will be boys idea, but it also has a very intriguing, you know, vigilante, death-proof kind of story going on with it, and I really, really was so surprised by how much I loved this. It was such a standout to me, and I highly, highly recommend it for everyone to check out. Alright guys, so that ended up being way longer than it was supposed to be, but there you go. That was my October wrap-up. You guys should let me know down below what was your favorite read of October, or if you've read any of these and you want to talk about them. That will be all good, and I will see you guys soon with another video. Bye!